Welcome back to Where It's At, Pediatrics for Parents, a podcast dedicated to parents and caregivers of children. Today we have episode 2. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Kyle from PAK Pediatrics.
And I'm Dr. Alvaro Raimunde, also from PAK Pediatrics. And today, like Dr. Kyle just said, we are on episode 2, and we will be talking about sports, strength training, and supplements. It's going to be a very exciting episode. We have 2 special guests today. The first is actually our office administrator, who curiously enough is also an athletic trainer, and he has a son, so he has a lot of experience with this. He has a son who actually plays Division I baseball and was drafted as into the Major League Baseball. So he should be a pretty good person to talk to.
Right, exactly, especially as a parent and the things that he went through with dealing with navigating through sports as a child all the way through college. It's going to be interesting. And then also we have Tim Hilva with us today, who is a personal trainer. He's also has a degree in nursing and has done a lot of work with personal training, but then also with developing kids programs for fitness, and also doing some work with various high school aged programs through high schools with their physical fitness. So he's going to have a lot, I think, to enlighten us today about training and how to really train and eat appropriately as a kid and young adult.
Yeah, so we're very excited for this episode. We hope you enjoy it. Before we get started, I do want to remind everybody that you can find us using PAK Peds on pretty much any social media websites or services that you use, as well as any podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, reviews and likes are always helpful for other families looking for quality information so that they know what to expect. As well as also, if you enjoy what you hear, remember to click that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And lastly, we do want to remind everybody that this podcast and the information in this podcast is for general educational purposes only. We will not be diagnosing or devising any individualized treatment plans for anybody. If you have any concerns, please contact your primary care provider.
That's right. All right, so without further ado, let's get on to the episode.
Thanks.
Okay, welcome back to Where It's At, Pediatrics for Parents. And today we're going to talk about sports, strength training, and supplements. And this, I think when we started talking about this, it really evolved into a huge topic we're going to break it down into 2 episodes.
We have to. It's going to be 2 parts for sure. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of misinformation out there too. So we want to make sure everything is spelled out clearly so that nobody has any confusions and everybody has the good, right information for this.
That's right. And, I think we both have children that are school-aged, and I have 2 children that are in high school, actually. And your children play sports.
Oh, yeah.
And my children play sports. And, after having children, you realize, man, is it expensive to raise kids or what? I mean, it is not cheap. And then you add in sports, and it gets even crazier, right? Because of all the stuff that's involved with sports. And that led us to sort of start thinking about, boy, let's look back at sports and what's been going on, right? So I know when I grew up, and I may be dating myself here, but, we grew up with community sports. We walked down to the sand lot and played baseball and pickup games of basketball and football, and the sports or organized sports really were around the community and community sponsored, and it's really changed. The landscape of that has changed a ton.
It has changed a lot. We feel that, and even in our practice, we see it nowadays. Organized sports is, there's a lot of pressure on kids, especially those whose parents also played sports, especially a particular sport. They put a lot of pressure on these kids, and even society as a whole. I mean, how much money is in organized sports right now? It like rules pretty much the school systems even.
It's unbelievable. And I think as pediatricians, you know, we're often encountered with kids with starting into one sport dedicated at an early age,
Right.
and you know, that push to specialize. And what you're seeing is, again, those community sports that we were talking about are really starting to turn into club sports, and everybody's playing on a travel team, right? So that's supplanting the community sports that we used to see. And when you look at it, you know, youth sports as a whole is a $17 billion business,
It's
billions. Crazy. And to put it in perspective, that is more than the MLB, the Major League Baseball, and the NFL. The NFL is a $15 billion business.
Yeah, so there's a lot of focus on this. And even within those sports, practice times, I mean, there's practice every single day for that one sport, which gives kids, they don't have much time to do anything else because they also have schoolwork to do and other things. So we're here to talk about kids practicing in multiple sports. When should they be doing that, or when should they be specializing in one sport?
Yeah, and you know, I just want to bring it back also to, is this an issue that we're seeing also? Because does it put extra pressure on kids? You know, the 2018-2019 high school year saw the first drop in high school sports since 1988. So it is
that right around where Fortnite started?
Yes, right. Yeah, exactly. That's right. So as organized sports that we know it today, is it limiting access for kids? And you know, today with this, again, as you said earlier, we have with us who is our practice administrator, J.R. Vogt, and his I think has a unique perspective because he has a child actually that was drafted by the MLB and actually went on to play division and is actually still now playing a Division I baseball at University of Maryland. And you know, so one of the things I think growing up we always talked about was, you know, diversity in sports and kids playing multiple sports, and we're seeing an erosion of that where kids are actually starting to focus and hyper-focus earlier on. And is that a good thing to get to that point that you want to be in as a successful athlete? And then all the pressures that get put on by, because this is an industry. And just like we said, I'm going to give a plug for our first episode when we talked about medical studies. And when you're looking at different medical studies, ones that are funded by companies, you have to look at with a suspect eye, right? So is some of what's going on really being, you know, it's an industry, so there's money to be made. So some of this being put on. So JR, like, you know, when your child started into sports, you know, from where they got into, like, what was it like? I mean, did your child play different sports, or were you really involved with, okay, I wanted my son to be a baseball player,
or I just want him out of the house, damn it?
Yeah.
Those are both good questions. So as a father of 4 boys, I actually have some pretty good experience with different levels and different ages of kids. Like most parents, we all want to coach our kids, right? I mean, when they're going through the community programs like you talked about, you know, that's when it's fun. And to me, that as their coach, you can only do so much for them, right? So at some point you go, okay, what else can we do? So we start looking at travel sports. But ultimately, they should all get started by playing in their backyard. And that's what we did. I can remember my kids growing up, I never had to ask where they were because I knew they were outside playing. And today, I just don't think we see that as much for whatever reason. Could be the Fortnite. A lot of it's COVID now, but besides COVID, you know, what are we doing?
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned about playing outside with your kids, because I feel also that nowadays, especially with the COVID pandemic, and kids are having a hard time finding time to exercise and playing outside. And parents are asking me, what can I do for my kid to play outside? And I'm like, go outside with them.
Right.
Then don't make it a chore. Don't tell them you have to play an hour every day outside. Go out with them and spread it out throughout the day.
Yeah, you don't have to coach them. You just have to be supportive of them. And sometimes that's all it takes.
So how old were your kids when they kind of started?
Yeah, I'll go back before that. So actually, I'm an athletic trainer. Went to the University of Pittsburgh for sports medicine. So I worked at a high school for about 10 years before I started having a family. And I saw a lot of the kids come through who, when I said to my wife, if we're going to start having a family, I don't want to make the same mistakes that I see some of these parents make with their kids. And that's being a helicopter parent for their sports. Right? We all want to be involved. You all want to be there for them. But sometimes you can go too far. And you want to coach them and do it for them. At some point, to being a good parent, you have to let them fail as well. And a lot of times, most parents are afraid of letting them fail. So when I saw the kids that would come through the program at the high school level, some of the best athletes I thought I've ever seen, they never did anything besides that because their parents wanted it more than they did. So that was the first thing I want to say. Make sure you're as a parent, you let your kids be kids. Because really that's what
that's
they
huge.
want to do.
That's huge advice.
Yep. So once you get through that, we did a lot of the community events. My son, we're referencing, played youth sports, soccer, baseball, obviously. He was a basketball player, and he enjoys hockey. So he's a four-sport athlete.
Right.
We really didn't start focusing on baseball until he was 14 years old. Everyone has to be that little leaguer who plays shortstop, right? Everybody has that kid in their team. But ultimately, everybody wants to have that chance to do that.
And it sounds like you did it right, because the American Academy of Pediatrics actually recommends sport specialization, like where you get into doing a deep dive into that sport really in like later adolescence. So 14 is like really around that
perfect.
time. And
that's a sweet spot.
And further, the recommendation to keep kids into various sports when they're younger is just really important, because they learn different skills in those sports. And I know that really I was just discussing this about how kids that play multiple sports actually need less time to get their specialized training to get where they need to be versus if they're just pigeonholed into one.
You talk to any college coach, the first thing they're going to ask you, how are your grades? How many sports did you play? Not whether you just played A, B, or C. They want kids who have played multiple sports, because it can lead to injury.
Right.
Specialization too early. We
Absolutely.
All know that.
Yep. The American Orthopedic Academy of Sports Medicine actually said that 50% of athletes who specialize at a young age have a much higher risk of injuries, and
Especially
the most common injury is overuse injury, way over trauma.
Yeah.
So
not to interrupt.
Oh,
but
sure, go ahead.
I have this running joke with my kids, and we'll see it on social media because everyone's trying to make the money, right? Promoting themselves as this coach, that coach. There are no U10 All-Americans, just so we all know that, right?
Yeah.
So you can be that guy, but it's not going to help them.
Interesting, in Norway, where they discourage really a lot of that pressure on young kids. So, for instance, there's no national championships for kids less than age 13, and they don't do any national rankings for kids until I think around 11 or 12 years old. But yet, this is in the Winter Olympics. The Norwegian team is one that does spectacularly well. So, it's really not that 0 to 12-year-old age is really just learning how to develop as a kid, and really just get general skills, right?
Yep.
I mean, how did you, JR? I wanted to ask a question too. How did you actually, did you feel pressure as a parent? With when you started to notice that your child, all right, he had good athletic ability? Because I always say that when you see people that are playing in the major league level, even if they're playing baseball, or we'll take baseball because you're saying, I mean, he could still pick up a football and throw it, and he could probably take a golf club and hit a golf ball, right? Because he's an athlete. So when you saw your kid, gosh, he's an athlete.
Other than his slice, we don't count.
Okay, yeah. But he's a good athlete. Did you start to feel pressure at all, like from maybe internally or even from external sources? Because there's money involved, right? And the people want kids to be on teams, because on one side, if you have a good club team, there's profitability there, right? So if you never, parents don't want to send their kids to a club team that's not doing well, and if people retract from that, they'll leave and that club team would dissolve. So there's some pressure for those people that have these club teams to keep them going. I mean, just comment on that a little bit for me.
Yeah, so my son is 22. So I came into this, I think, when it was just starting to explode.
Okay.
Nationally. My second oldest son is a hockey player. So he's playing junior hockey. So he's athletic too. But there's different timelines for that. Hockey, generally, they mature a little later. Baseball, generally, a little bit earlier. But from a grand scheme of things, yeah, you feel pressure. I think it goes back to my training, seeing some of the injuries that these kids have and not wanting to expose them to that. But I was a big advocate of making sure that they do multiple sports, because I had the background to understand that.
Right,
and
right.
I think if you walk away from anything, if you hear this, is make sure that you do multiple sports at every level you can, whether it's community or otherwise, and make sure they have fun.
Right.
I mean, that's the most important thing. I mean, yeah, everybody has those kids that are the all-stars on the Little League team. He didn't start travel baseball till he was 14.
Wow.
Just because at the time, it may not have been as prevalent then, so, that might be another issue.
Sure.
Now there's a lot of pressure to do it. And those organizations know it, and just like anything else, it's driven by the mighty dollar.
Right.
So don't feel pressure to do it. Just because your neighbors are doing it doesn't mean you have to do it.
Right.
Be a parent and make a good decision for your family.
Right.
That's all.
And I think a lot of the data and things that we're bringing forth, just
Support
that,
And the idea of multiple sports, right, is to become a well-rounded athlete. So certain sports definitely promote the use of certain muscles, whereas other sports will kind of balance those muscles. And also by playing multiple sports, it gives your body a chance to recover the certain muscles that are primarily used in the one sport. For example, soccer, it's a lot of sprinting, it's a lot of, hamstring strength and core body and quadriceps, whereas maybe golf, you're going to do a lot more coordination, upper body, core, and things like that. So
yeah, and we know if you play a singular sport more than 8 months in a row, your risk of injury goes up exponentially. And that's the last thing that you want from a growing body. I've heard people talk about, orthopedic surgeons talk about, if you end up needing, if you were a pitcher in Little League and you end up injuring your elbow enough that you need surgery, you will never pitch in the major leagues, period. It's over. Yeah. So, it's all about availability, right? And being able to play the sport too. And, you really want to watch that risk of injury.
Right, and play it safely.
What's sad about that is coaches need to win. Right. And if they don't win, they don't have a team. So generally your kids are used as a pawn in that scheme so they can win. That's just the reality.
Right.
Yeah. The greater number of athletic activities your kid gets in from age 0 to 12, the less sports-specific training they need to become an expert in that. And that's just the fact, And I want to sort of get back a little bit to JR about, what you were talking about with, let your kid be a kid and playing different sports. So your son is not alone. In a survey done of 296 NCAA Division I athletes, 88% of them played 2 to 3 sports as kids and in high school. And I just want to outline Patrick Mahomes, who's playing this weekend. Football, baseball, and basketball. Played all 3 of those in high school. James Harden, who is the, probably one of the premier guards now in the NBA, didn't start playing organized basketball until age 10. LeBron James, King James, played baseball and football. Clayton Kershaw, one of the best right now pitchers in the league. I don't think I'm going to argue that. Baseball and football. And finally, I can't leave out tennis. Got to leave it because you're a tennis player.
I am
right?
a tennis player.
So Roger Federer played baseball or basketball, tennis, soccer, wrestling, And I'm talking about when they were
Yeah,
kids,
when they were younger.
and so they must have been doing.
Yeah.
They weren't
Another tennis player, Rafael Nadal, who is arguably one of the best players in the world right now in the past few years. He contributes his success to playing soccer from a very early age. He says his footwork is as good as it is because of all the practice he had playing soccer.
See,
which is amazing.
Yeah, that's makes sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's right in front of us and we don't see it though. Yeah.
But something I do want to point out too is we're talking about multi-sport and having kids play multiple sports, but rest is super important too. And
Sure.
And there is a limit that is suggested by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I'm sure other societies as well, as to how many hours of active exercise a kid could get, as depending on their age. And the kind of rule of thumb from the research that I've made has been that a kid should not exercise more than 1 hour per week per age. So if you have a 13-year-old, that 13-year-old should not play more than 13 hours a week.
That's a weekend for most athletes.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah.
Any more than that will increase the risk of injury.
Good. I mean, really, I think our take home here is that young kids from 0 to 12, even up to 14, 15 years old, as in the case of your own child, JR, just really need to get out there and experience life and experience different sports and
have fun with
it and understand that there's a lot of pressures to really specialize in a environment where only 2% of all children will ever play Division I sports, and a lot of money gets spent in that. And I think as parents, everyone just has to take a step back and look and make sure that you're doing the right thing. I am not knocking, and I don't think you're knocking club sports or,
absolutely
or travel
not.
sports.
They're certainly warranted.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing is your kids enjoy music.
Right.
Go fishing. There's other things you can do other than sports too. Sometimes just spending time with them is important as well.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I think we just talked about specializing in sports in general, right? So now we're going to talk about, I think, and this is for older kids as they're starting to specialize, sports-specific training. We hear a lot about that. And, I play football or I play soccer. So should I be doing my training to get to a higher level, just surrounded around the muscle movements and things with that sport? And I think that's a hot topic.
It is a hot topic.
Getting generalized.
And talking, going back to what we were talking before, how important overall fitness and exercising different parts of the muscle of the body are important. Once we start into specialized sports, that's still important. So how do we train? How do we train our bodies? How do we exercise so that we don't get overuse injury, so that we are well-rounded and not just practice or strengthen those muscles specific to your specific sport?
Tim Hilva, personal trainer.
Guru.
Has done a lot with kids and things.
You.
And so we want to hear a lot, because one of the things too, and what we were talking about with JR was about, sports and youth sports is a multi-billion-dollar industry, outpaces the NFL. Well, training is another industry where there's a lot of cash involved, right? And the newest stuff is coming out. And one thing with kids as pediatricians we're always concerned about is with the media. And I just remember seeing one of the NFL pros, and there was a general, right? So Instagram post that he did, and it was him training, and he's standing on a Bosu ball with sunglasses on that are strobe lights, and he's catching footballs on one leg, and that's like, I think for our listeners, like that's like the ultimate like sports specific training, So what do our kids need to be doing? Should I have my 15-year-old, just out there?
Right.
He plays lacrosse with the 30-pound lacrosse stick, just doing repetitive motions over and over again.
On a Bosu ball.
On a Bosu ball.
So sport-specific training. I mean, me personally, I never really liked that term. I know that it exists, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a myth.
Right.
But I think the term has gotten watered down. tremendously, especially with social media. It's definitely a buzzword. So if I'm a parent and my kids are looking for some training and I see a business advertising sports-specific training, I'm turned on to that because I think that, well, this certain business must know what they're doing.
Exactly.
Whatever.
Or it must be better.
Or must be better.
Right.
So,
And you see it in other avenues. I've had people saying that, oh, my kid needs a counselor, but there's a sports-specific counselor for my 14-year-old.
Exactly. There's definitely a cool factor to that.
Right.
You know, if I'm a young athlete, I want to go there.
Sure.
Especially if they're doing and posting videos of something cool on social media. So it's definitely a buzzword. The term has gotten watered down. You know, I don't really believe that there's sport-specific exercises for young athletes. You know, at this stage in the game, they need to learn how to squat, jump, sprint, pull, those sorts of things. So if you take different sports, let's say swimming, basketball, a baseball pitcher, clearly they're all different sports, but they do have a lot of things in common. And what they have in common is they have their hands over their head a lot of time.
Right.
Okay, so if I'm training one of those athletes, I'm not necessarily looking at what exercises to put into their program. I'm making sure they're not doing a lot of overhead things. So I might be pulling some things out of a program that I see.
Which may sound counterintuitive to some parents.
Right. Because if you're, you know, I think parents or even the young adults, if they're listening to this, right? So if they're going at practice and whatever sport they're practicing, that's exercise and that's part of the workout, right? And so you might not want to overwork those muscles, lead to injury.
Which would lead to overuse injuries. And like you guys were saying earlier, a lot of them play multiple sports and they may be, you know, impeding against each other or interfering with each other. So as a trainer, I'm looking at not necessarily what to put in, I'm looking at possibly what to take out to make sure that their muscles are balanced. So we're stacking the deck in their favor of not injuring themselves.
Right. And then when we're talking about kids training, you know, we're not, just to clarify here, we're not talking about 10-year-olds getting in the gym by any means.
No,
but this is more the adolescent. But, you know, in addition, right, I mean, like strength leads to power, leads to movement through space and getting better. So the core here is I need at a younger age, for those athletes that are competitive, is I need to get stronger.
Strength and power. I mean, that's clear across the board. So it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't matter what sport you play. Most athletes need to develop strength and power. And there are common ways to do that, or agreed upon ways to do that. When you get down to specific programs, that's where the debate is on they should be doing this or that. But I think it's across the board that athletes need to develop strength and power. Not necessarily at this age hopping on that Bosu ball, doing these cool things. But that's, you know, if I'm marketing something, you know, I may market something like that. Well, that looks cool. Kids want to do that, and that's where they want to go.
And you're saying strength and power, and I'm sure the adolescents listening or watching us are like, yeah, I want strength, I want power. I'm just going to go to the gym and lift some 50-pound weights and just go for it. And I've been sitting on my butt for the past 6 months, but I'm just going to go there. I'm just going to crank it out, get a workout in. Clearly, that's not what we want them to be doing. So in your opinion, like, especially for the younger children that are maybe starting to get interested in going to the gym or working out and getting some strength training, what's the best way to start? Should they seek a personal trainer? Should they just start at home? Should they join a gym? Or should they just kind of practice on technique and
That's a good question. You know, there's a lot of good ways to start. I think we could eliminate some of the bad ways that they should be starting.
Yeah. Tell us what not to do.
What not
I'm
to
going to
do.
take notes here.
What not to do is just do what everyone else is doing. Or if you go to the gym, just do what you see people doing, because you have no idea or if they're doing anything correctly or if it's going to benefit you. A lot of times, even adults, we go to a gym and we tend to do what other people are doing, especially if they're fitish. You know, so we want to emulate that. So definitely, I would not recommend just winging it. what we do want to do is, I would reach out to someone who knows what they're doing. Trainers, athletic trainers, perhaps it's a parent, learn fundamentals. Young athletes want to get better quicker.
Quick.
It's,
Right now.
It's
Have a game next
it's
weekend.
the American way right now.
Right.
We want everything immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to learn those fundamentals.
Right.
And until then, you don't need to
Sure.
jump ahead to those
Sure.
50-pound dumbbells.
I think that's why, there is a book Malcolm Gladwell did about, people becoming experts. God, the name of it escapes me, but, it was like, it takes 10,000 hours, and he did all this research to become an expert in something. And, that's great and people really enjoyed this book, but one of the criticisms of it is that that's the American way, right? It's like that's the easy part to say, okay, if I do something for 10,000 hours, I'm going to become an expert at it. When there's much more involved than just I'm going to get there and do it. You have
100%.
there's more involved than that, right?
A lot more involved. Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sure you could comment that being in countless gyms your whole life, right? Getting back to the whole fad thing, like as adults, and I think parents listening to this podcast, if you look back and think about all the different sports specific training things that have been out there, and and what's out there now, and it's constantly evolving. But I think if I've been in a couple NCAA gyms and pro gyms, and where the pro players are working out in, and you've been in them yourselves, but there's still a bench, a rack, plates, and dumbbells, right? I mean, so
yeah. So those fundamental pieces of equipment are standard pieces of equipment. And back when I was in college in the 90s, a lot of things, most things haven't changed. Marketing has changed, of course, which leads us to believe we need X, Y, or Z. But at the end of the day, you need only certain things. And so equipment has evolved, certainly, and there are some pieces of equipment that are beneficial, of course. But, dumbbells go a long way.
Yeah.
And they're hard to beat.
So I guess really that, we'll wrap this part of the segment up anyway, and at least try to agree that, for teens and young athletes, again, the most important thing is really learning how to generally get fit to become a whole person that is fit and active versus trying to just, use the same muscle groups that are important for that sport, because that's just not the best way.
Yeah, it's definitely not about how much you could bench.
Yeah.
You hear that a lot,
right.
But it's about, developing basic human functions really well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, we'd like to thank our listeners for this podcast, part 1 of 2 on sport training, and hope you join us for our next episode, which is going to be on...
we're going to be talking a lot about strength training in general, best ways to do it, when to start, how old my kid should be, things like that. And we're also going to talk a lot about supplements, maybe some proteins and some amino acid, pre-workouts, post-workout drinks, and
another big industry.
Another big industry for sure.
Okay.
We're going to take a little break, and we'll see you at part 2.
Thank you.
Bum, 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 bum.